Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here today. Thanks, Dr. Kraft. Wow, I'm inspired. I hope you guys are all inspired too. I want to talk a little bit about 3D printing. How many of you in the room have heard about 3D printing in the last year, 2 years, about 10 years? Any of you in the room? Several. If we think about 3D printing, it's really had a lot of buzz in the last couple of years. That goes back many years, and I'm going to talk today. I'm going to focus a little bit about what the state of the art is for 3D printing. I'm going to focus also on what we know about the tools and how they're used for medicine. I've been lucky to be involved in something that I'm very passionate about for a good number of years, talking about personalized surgery. So I want to share with you some of the tools, some of the applications, and then talk about why now, why now kind of building for the future. 10 years ago, it was still 20 years after 3D printing actually was invented. This part you're looking at is the first 3D printed part made here in Southern California by a guy named Chuck Hull. Chuck, the inventor of 3D printing, had just produced that part using a process called stereolithography, later to be coined. Chuck had to develop not only the process but the language, and you can think about the computing power Chuck had available as well in the early 1980s, and it was different than today, obviously. I want to show a brief video that has sound just to show a little bit about application areas on the non-medical side of how 3D printing is impacting the world.
Are the inventor and the establisher of this technology.
I mean, things that we do now within a day to 2 days would take months to build by hand.
So you see we're involved in the whole spectrum. You get some feeling from that video. Everything from, on the left side of the screen, $1,000 printers that can be put in your home or put in an office or put in a school, up to $1 million, $1.5 million printers that produce, engineering grade, parts capable to go into space, parts capable of being put in race cars, parts capable of being put in our bodies. It's an exciting time to be doing what we're doing in 3D printing. Many different materials. So you'd see, in that video, you get some sense that all of these things are created by layers. So you could imagine an orange sliced into slices and stuck back together layer by layer by layer. Many different material choices are available to kind of put back those layers. Everything from wax to metals to polymers to even, as Dr. Kraft mentioned, chocolate. And looking at it, the ecosystem kind of surrounding 3D printing doesn't just involve the 3D printers. So over time, the 3D printer, and in the beginning, the 3D printer needed a language to talk about. So what we call the STL file format was that language that was developed to talk to it. But you as well today have, the need to capture data. And I think of us as a way to kind of reduce the friction between the physical world and the digital world. And so you can think of capturing data as taking something in the physical world, say this object, capturing it into a digital space, and then we've got a need then to manipulate that in the digital space. And we then use the design and manipulation tools that are available. But we go back from there, we need to go back to 3D printed, the physical world. So if you've got a printer on your desk that you can again hit print once you've scanned it, manipulate it to your liking, and you can print it back into the physical world. So it kind of reduces this friction to go back and forth, which is an amazing technology, and I'll talk about it for medicine, but amazing technology for all kinds of areas because it allows you to iterate much, much quicker. So you can iterate, in days instead of weeks or months or years for certain products. that complexity and that ecosystem allows us to create things of varying complexity. And you'll see things that, I have a video to show in a second about complexity and the fact that in 3D printing, complexity really is a given, and complexity you get for free. So the 3D printer doesn't care if you've got a solid shape or a porous shape or whatever. It just knows that in a given layer, it needs to print out material in some places and not in other places. And so you can make things like the glasses in the middle very complex. You'll see a cake. Things like sugar and chocolate are now possible to print, and not only in cool shapes, but in cool colors. And you can think about this as an application that doesn't really apply maybe to medicine, but you'd see that people are thinking about this for drug forms and for other things where you can actually control, how something's going to elute based on where you print it within a shape, as long as that shape is something that you can eat. Complexity being free, this is a core aspect of 3D printing. And you'd see this in many types of areas. You'd see things that aren't so complex being 3D printed, but you'll see things of amazing complexity being 3D printed that really are opening up, a completely different paradigm for how things are designed. Designers go to school, they aren't taught. They're taught to live within a rule box. And that rule box has changed over time, and 3D printing is another piece for why that's changed and will keep changing, because you have the ability to make things you could not make any other way. So talking about medical, even these three examples are from the last month. So this is current, information. Many of you would get a newspaper still in your mailbox. How many of you? Just so I have a feeling. Some of us still get newspapers every once in a while. That Parade magazine probably hit many millions of homes talking about 3D printing and across many different areas. Highlighted on the cover is a project from a group called Enable, trying to create prosthetics and kind of try to crowdsource prosthetics. A really interesting idea, a powerful idea to let people with $1,000 printers, $2,000 printers help someone far away. In the middle, a monthly magazine in Detroit called Hour, talking about top doctors, and on the cover a representation of personalized surgery for a cranial surgery. And on the right, something from Wired magazine about 3D printed body parts, an area that we all see more and more and more. If you hear about 3D printing in the media, you'd either hear about things that are on the very high end and futuristic, like creating organs, or you hear about creating toys, you hear about creating personalized things. This brings me to, why are we here today? I have this brief quote from the FDA, I think is a key kind of element to moving forward. This is not just talking about, personalized surgery, which is what I'll focus on today, but this is talking about personalized healthcare and medicine. And I think 3D printing has a big impact to play in these areas. And you're already seeing today, I can see it touching, not just tens and hundreds and thousands of patients' lives, but we're talking about today, it's touching tens of thousands and potentially hundreds of thousands of people. And where we go from there, the thought of touching 1 billion people is not so far away. So before we step forward, we step back even before the advent of 3D printing. How many of the room would recognize that this is the first clinical CT image ever taken? So this is now 40-year-old technology of the CT scan. Sir Godfrey Hounsfield won the Nobel Prize many years later for this invention, which no doubt has spurred, think of the life-saving advances that CT and MR have brought to us. So for CT, this is key. This is an interesting kind of adjunct, because a lot of what we do today in personalized surgery has to do with the combination of the CT scan and the combination of that with 3D printing. And so those two tools, with Hounsfield and Hull, have given us these tools. Question is, why now? Why here? So what? And it's a good question, an interesting question. So these 30 and 40-year-old technologies, and I'm sure there are many other areas you'd see this happen in. Why are these two technologies coming together now? And I think there are many areas where you could say, well, it's got to do with machines and materials and speed and accuracy, and those would all be correct answers. I think for what we're doing, a lot of it has to do with kind of the digital workflow that we call the digital thread, kind of the ecosystem that happens in the middle. So if you think about the fact that we want to go from an image somehow, and we want to take a patient and make them digital, and then we want to treat the patient. At the end of the day, the surgery is a very important part, is all the patient cares about. It's a lot that the rest of the stakeholders care about also. In the middle, though, between when you'd acquire data and when you need to take the patient to surgery, there's a lot of stuff that happens. And I think to me, the question I raised earlier about why now and why are these 30 and 40-year-old technologies is because of this, and because of those pieces of one come together and two come together in a way that even today we can grasp how many of those pieces can be automated. And maybe not today stuck on the surgeon's desk, but in the not so distant future, these pieces of information, these tools can be placed in a way, an easy package on somebody's desk that can allow access to this data. So given a scan of a patient, getting to surgery in very powerful ways. So the value, we all could see that stakeholders, in surgery, there are many stakeholders, and I think that if we were the patient, we'd all consider ourselves to be the most, the biggest stakeholder, the most important stakeholder. I think that as a patient, you'd walk in, and I think any one of us would choose, if we had a choice between something that was personalized, your surgical procedure, you're going to have this personalized to you, versus this is what I've got, this is the off-the-shelf solution. We're all probably going to choose personalized, unless there's a really good reason for why, based on time or cost or something else that non-personalized would benefit. I think those reasons, we're starting to check the boxes and check those off the list to where personalized medicine and personalized surgery can be offered to you and me at a cost and time feasible way. So I want to talk through some of the applications while looking at this digital thread. So the first piece of this is the imaging. We're all familiar with, that you go in and get an X-ray, you can get a CT scan, you can get an MRI. These technologies have been around for many years, CT being around for 40 years, MRI maybe around for 30 years, give or take. On the left, a current CT. On the right, you talk about increased access. One of the things that would limit the ability to do certain things is the access to imaging. And so on the right, you see what is known in the dental specialties as a cone beam CT. So this is a machine that, like the CT scanner on the left, can acquire volumetric data, 3D data, but instead of doing that at a cost point of $2 million to buy a piece of capital equipment that can only be placed in a centralized location, they're on the right making a $100,000 to $200,000 piece of equipment that can be put anywhere. It can be put in a doctor's office in any location, allowing better access, quicker access, cheaper access to data. And not only that, it provides it at about 1/10 the radiation dosage. So they're able to get decent volumetric data at a fraction of the price, at a fraction of the radiation, which has really changed things. And in digital dentistry, this is one of those technologies that's transformational and that's guiding things forward. Kind of leading from there, medical image processing is one of those tools where you need to be able to take that data. So here, a CT scan, and you need to do something with it. This is a sliced X-ray, so kind of like a backwards 3D print. We're here reverse engineering the body by slicing the body into slices. We've got to extract useful information out of that. A lot of times what we're doing is extracting bony information. So we're trying to get information out of the computer to help us guide some reconstructive surgery of the bone. So processes would go through where you'd be basically filtering data. And Sir Hounsfield, that I showed in the beginning, the inventor of the CT scan, is still immortalized by a scale that's used in computed tomography, which is the Hounsfield scale. So every one of those pixels, there's across there, you could have a range of about 4,000 gray values, and it's called the Hounsfield scale. So based on density, we're able to pick out what's useful. Some of these tools that have taken hours and hours in the past are now able to be done in minutes, allowing, again, the decentralization of some of these tools to be placed into the hands of surgeons and others that would need them. So in my history, I come from making a lot of models like this. So we take a CT scan and output a facsimile of that patient's anatomy. You say, why would you use that? Well, the common reasons were to, prepare for surgery. So you could think of, the concept of having something 2D versus something 3D, and here's something physical in 3D. It has more information to offer the surgical team about how they're going to fix a case. In this case, a patient's got a large tumor in the left side of their jaw, and you can tell there's a tooth. Actually, that little floating bit in the base is actually a tooth that's sunk down into a tumor. So a condition you wouldn't want, and by the time you've gotten here, you need to have a lot of your jaw replaced. Models would be made, so these are 3D printed models from different varieties that would be used for education, other models for training, models for demonstration of surgical techniques. But in the end, what we're doing, we're focused on personalized surgery. So in this case, that model of that patient, this is a teenager from Uganda, had a condition that in the U.S. would have been treated much earlier, and Uganda was left untreated. he needed to have surgery. And so in the end, the model became a physical way for the surgeon to practice how they were going to put, Patero's head back together. So on the left, the practice surgery that could be done a day or a week or an hour before the actual surgery. And then that data, the surgeon could use that as a way to go into surgery. Now, this has been done for the last 15 years or so. And what we're now seeing is the ability to transfer a lot of that information into the digital sense. So you're not actually having to cut and move the skull around and only do it once because you got a physical thing. And if you cut it, you got to go back and make another physical thing. We're also seeing this not only in hard tissue, but you're seeing this in soft tissues. And so I think a future, there's a great future still for physical models, although, the era of digital models as well for simulation has never been hotter than it is right now. And even during this conference, you'll see some of those tools for digital simulation on anatomy. That's a really exciting area. This is the cover of a journal called Urology from August of this year, talking about using models as tools for planning surgeries, in this case, removing a tumor from a kidney. You'd see this applied in many different areas. And again, you'd see the purpose of a 3D model, is again, if it's a surgical thing, it's about planning for surgery and helping to make sure that you can see what you're going to see before you actually get into the patient, or things you could never see because you can't actually get in there. In device development, you'd also see these tools being used. Where you're developing a new stent or some new methodology of treating something, you need a library of things to be used. We talk about an exciting area of virtual surgical planning. This is an area that I've spent a lot of time in the last few years working on. I want you to think of it, I want to kind of explain it in a way that you can take it home today. So virtual surgical planning is kind of this area of personalized surgery where we're talking about bony reconstruction. So here, I think of two buckets. The first bucket, cutting and moving bone. So I apologize, there are one or two bloody images in the slides. But in this case, think of the patient whose image is shown on the left. The green area is a malignant portion of the mandible. So this case, we're going to take out, everything that's green is going to come out. So most of the lower jaw is going to need to be removed. In doing that, we're going to take and devise a set of tools. So the red tools that turn into the white physical parts that are 3D printed are actually the tools to be taken to surgery and used to guide that same cut in that patient, and only in that one very specific location. So those tools are made for you, and they're made for your surgery based on your images, and they're only going to fit in one place to guide a saw. What you see on the right is that saw being placed into that cut. Now, in this case, lest you think we were going to leave the patient without any at the front of the mandible, which happens occasionally, but not intentionally, we're going to actually replace that with bone from the lower leg. So we work with surgeons. This effort usually is a combination of a head and neck surgeon, an oral maxillofacial surgeon, combined with a plastic microvascular surgeon. And the microvascular surgeons would say, God gave you your fibula just in case you needed part of your jaw replaced, because they use it a lot. And it sounds funny, but it's the gold standard. So they use part of your fibula, and you apparently don't need all of it, so they can take out a bit in the middle and use it to replace it. But the problem with the fibula is that it's a long, straight bone, and so it doesn't look like your mandible. So in this case, we make cutting guides that are going to transfer a plan from the computer to the patient using a series of 3D printed plastic cutting guides. This has some sound. I'll show this quick video of a different procedure.
A high-definition CT scan of the patient's head. The scan produces a computer-simulated model of the skull, which will be used in the virtual surgical planning. Mayo Clinic surgeons and engineers at Medical Modeling will work together to plan how the skull can be best reshaped. The model is compared to the size and shape of a normal skull of the same age, and planning begins as how to best divide the skull. The model can be divided into pieces to simulate cuts in the bone, and the pieces can then be reassembled into a more natural overall shape. The model can be examined in detail, both outside and inside, and options can be explored until the best results are achieved. Room is left between the bone pieces, which will allow the brain to grow naturally. Having determined where the cuts will be made and how the pieces will be reassembled, Medical Modeling manufactures a cutting template and a repositioning template. This completes the planning stage, and the templates are sent to Mayo Clinic. In the operating room, the patient's skull is exposed, and the first template, consisting of back and front sections, is fit snugly onto the skull. Grooves in the template allow the surgeon to mark the skull to outline each piece of bone to be separated. Each piece is also marked with an identifying label. After the guide is removed, the surgeons follow the markings to cut the bone pieces. The repositioning template, consisting of left and right halves, is prepared to receive the bone pieces. Each piece has a designated position and orientation within the template. As compared to standard surgical procedure for sagittal craniosynostosis, this individually customized method allows for precise positioning of each bone segment, accurately reproducing the virtual plan in the operating room. After the halves of the template are fitted back together, the bone segments are secured to each other using plates and screws. The plates and screws will eventually dissolve. The template is removed, and the newly remodeled portion of the skull is ready to be fitted back onto the patient. It is secured in place, and the scalp is then closed.
So I'll kind of stop it there. Interesting. It's very interesting work. It's not as interesting to me to watch a space shuttle take off. So I have to say I need some more audio there. But in a real world application, you see those tools, used by a leading center like Mayo Clinic to take a child, here born with a condition called medopic craniosynostosis, where they've got a closure of one of the sutures, the growth plates of the skull. That closes prematurely. So at a very young age, they need to decide what they're going to do. And typically these kids go to surgery within, 6 to 9 months of life. So they're operated either between 3 and 9 months typically. So in this case, we took a child, tools used, what you saw kind of in a virtual sense here, tools used physically in a way of templating and putting back together. And he was a cute kid going in, and he's a cute kid going out, and I think that's the goal. They were able to get a good result. They got what they wanted to get surgically out of it. They got the correction they needed, and they did it in the most efficient way possible, reducing time under anesthesia and other things that are very important for young kids and all of us, obviously. So there are two buckets, as I mentioned, for this concept of virtual surgical planning. The second bucket is total joint replacement. So we heard a little earlier just talk about knees, and knees are a great application because there are many, it's one of the most common joint replacements in the body. So there's something close to 1 million knees that are replaced in a year. So this is a big market. Within the orthopedic segment, it's a big market. And many solutions exist for taking and placing they replace a knee by typically taking out the top and the bottom of around your knee joint. So as you've got cartilage that's been damaged, they'll take the top and the top of the tibia out, the bottom of the femur out, and replace the articulation with something that is metal and plastic. So the metal component on the top, a metal component on the bottom, kind of holding an insert. Those two, the polyethylene and the femoral component, are what then rub together to create the articulation of a new knee. In a typical knee surgery, got a bunch of stuff. It's a hugely inefficient. Many things within surgery you'd find to be hugely inefficient. This is one of those areas we've got tons of inventory that are brought in for a single case because they don't know. They don't know your size. They don't know what exactly they're going to need. Maybe that surgeon likes a certain instrument that the other surgeons in the hospital don't. So they bring in a ton of stuff. And here we could equate this to 6 or 7 trays, big trays of instruments. Now, the concept for why virtual surgical planning can apply in this area is to take and not create a custom implant, but to take a standard implant, an off-the-shelf implant, and allow a company to know that before surgery they can plan out and they can take a scan and they can plan with the surgeon. They know that you're going to need a number 4, implant on your right. They know you're going to need a number 4 femoral component and a number 4.5 tibial component. So before surgery, they know exactly what to send into the OR, and with that, they design cutting guides. And this is one of the areas within personalized surgery that's gotten the most attention. That's really a great story for where things can go all across medicine. These cutting guides then are created in a way, and you'll see kind of a horizontal cut. The left side of that bottom image is the tibia, and the left side here, so you'll see a tibia. So you see kind of a flat cut across the left image in the bone. That cut is being projected by that drill guide that is going to fit only one way and only for you and only to guide the implants. And in this way, they've taken, instead of 7 trays of instruments, they can break that down to 1 tray of instruments with very inexpensively created 3D printed tools and off-the-shelf implants that are also very inexpensively created because they've made them the same way they make all the other implants. Now, there are other ways to customize all of that, but this is one application, and a very interesting application of the technology where it's being used tens of thousands of times a year already and has much more application application to kind of grow from there. And you'd see products on the market from most all the major manufacturers that have something to do with 3D printing guidance for total knee replacement. An exciting area. Haptic design, we talked a little bit earlier just about design tools. We have haptic enabled design that I think you'll be able to see here. If you stop by, our 3D Systems has a table, and you'll be able to see the concept of being able to touch data. So these tools allow you to actually feel what you're designing, are a powerful tool for moving forward and designing many different types of things. Here's an application of design. So I want to talk just a little bit about design. Scoliosis is a condition, a curvature of the spine. Many of you wouldn't know that it affects young women much more prevalently than young men. So it's about 90% female, 10% male, and typically between the age of 10 and 14 onset. And the braces that are made, typically, many of them look worse than this, and they're bulky. They're many of them very hot, non-breathable, non-stylish for sure. And you think of a young woman diagnosed with a condition, needs to wear a brace. The key to this, and the key to wearing it, why do they even put young women in braces, is because if properly braced, many of those women can escape needing surgery by the time they're skeletally mature. So by the time they're 16 or 17, they've either progressed and need surgery to correct the curvature of the spine, or they've solved it and they've pushed things back to where they should be. Now, compliance is key. Those things, the braces that's not something you'd want to wear. You wouldn't want to wear if you weren't a 10 to 14-year-old girl. You definitely wouldn't want to wear. So here, the concept of how 3D printing plays a role is you take design and you allow design to be used in a way that facilitates taking what is a medical device and a therapeutic device and making it something of beauty and less something of an instrument of torture or an instrument, something that you wouldn't actually want to wear, to make it actually something that you might want to wear. And again, some of these tools, you get complexity, and here the concept that you could have the young woman actually pick out the style and hit 3D print and get back something that's breathable, washable, stylish, low profile. It's got a lot of benefits and potentially helps compliance, which can potentially save surgery. 3D printing, I've talked a little bit about plastic and sugar and all that. Here, something you may not see as much, and the video on the right may not play, but the video on the left kind of showing metal 3D printing. So how many of you in the room know that there are 3D metal printed implants currently cleared by the FDA? I mean, is that news to many of you? So there's several of you that know. There are many devices that are now FDA cleared for implants, long-term reconstructive implants that are 3D printed. A couple that are polymers, and many more that are titanium or cobalt chrome or other things. So here, using 3D printing technology, we're able to make fully dense titanium parts, cobalt chrome parts, other materials that look like this. So you'd find many different applications, mostly centered around reconstructive surgery. So you'd find the hip and the knee and the spine and the foot and ankle and others leading the way. But these are parts that are cleared for specific indications and cleared not as a personalized thing, but this is using 3D printing as a tool to create a metal object. Simulation, this is key. So we just saw a great video that was really a good overview of the Solinger flight. Here, I think we all would feel comfortable knowing that our pilots go through some simulation, and if they change aircraft, or if they're not flying very much, or if they're new, they have to go through it. Well, the same thing exists, and here, I think the group here is lucky to be able to see some of the technology. Symbionics is a surgical simulation company. It's now part of 3D Systems, so we're now invested in simulation in a different way than we have been before, and you'll get to see some of that here. Here's a tool where they're using a patient's data set and simulating right before surgery, the same intervention they're going to do in surgery. And I think, kind of ending there, I had two kind of closing thoughts. One has to do with bioprinting. So there's been, even this morning, there's a bit of talk this afternoon on bioprinting. It's a hot area. I truly believe that regenerative medicine and bioprinting is a huge potential, and we're only going to see more and more of it. And the beauty of it and how it relates to 3D printing is it's a logical fit with 3D printing, because you can deposit certain levels of materials in certain areas in a 3D object just as you want to deposit them. So you don't just kind of make something as a whole and kind of seed it wherever. You can seed it exactly where you'd want it with the different types of cells. You'd find many people doing great work in this area, and I'll give credit to a few people like Dr. Atala at Wake Forest working on kidneys. group here in San Diego, Organovo, working on tissue and printing human liver tissue, not with the first goal of printing a whole liver, but the fact that you could print liver tissue and actually do testing against what is human liver tissue, but that's not part of a human, is a great advance. Other groups working on skin. This group out of Austin, an offshoot of UTEP, is working on creating skin and focused on breast reconstruction, and nipples is a very challenging area for reconstruction. And then work in other body parts like ears and other things that are cartilage-based, and Larry Bonacer and his group at Cornell. So many of these things, this is a 3D printed tracheal stent. This is actually using selective laser sintering technology to print. So you'd see much of this coming. One more kind of closing thought is just thinking about how these tools can be used to localize or regionalize production. And I think in many industries you see production being far away. And I think what 3D printing has the possibility to kind of decentralize production and to make production more local and to take production, what used to happen has to happen somewhere else for cost or time or efficiency purposes, and bring it to the individual, bring it to a region, bring it to a center, bring it to a hospital. Thank you for having me here today. It's a great pleasure.